Welcome to UC Santa Barbara's Innovator Stories series. I'm John Greathouse. You can follow me on Twitter at John Greathouse. We have Heather Hochrein with us today. She is the founder and the CEO of EVmatch. Heather has a grand vision. We like to bring people in that have a grand vision. Her goal or her vision is to create an inclusive, clean energy economy. That's a big vision. To this end, she started EVmatch, which has created a national peer-to-peer network of electric vehicle charging stations. She's well-versed in clean technology. Before she started EVmatch, she spent over 5 years in leadership positions with Rising Sun Energy Center, where she managed their innovation programs as well as a team of 25 people. She holds a bachelor's in molecular environmental biology from UC Berkeley. I don't even know what that means, so I'm going to ask her what that means. And she also got an emphasis during her undergraduate career in human and environmental health. We're very proud that she came to UC Santa Barbara and she earned her master's degree in energy and climate from the Bren School here at UC Santa Barbara. So let's give her a very, very warm welcome.
Good to see you.
So I've been told my introductions are too long, so I tried to shorten. You have many more accomplishments which I left off, but we will get to those, I'm sure, as we chat.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So I always like to hear with entrepreneurs kind of what your personal life was like and as you were growing up. So because it's so divergent, right? There's so many paths to entrepreneurship. Did you come from a startup family? Did your siblings take that path? What did your folks do?
Yeah, great question. So no, I did not come from a startup family or really even an entrepreneurial background. My father is was a civil engineer for the U.S. Forest Service, and my mom was a teacher, a third grade teacher. And so they both worked for the government, quite different.
My parents too.
So they did not, really focus on kind of business. Yep. But I would say that their focus was largely on, with my father, with the environment. Mm-hmm. And so we lived in a rural town in Northern California, Quincy, California, which is about a 5,000 population town. Oh, okay. So very small.
What's the nearest larger town that we would know?
Reno, Nevada, or Truckee, California.
Sure.
So some people know Quincy because of skiing, the proximity to Lake Tahoe.
And one of your accomplishments I left off was you skied at Berkeley.
Yeah, I was on the Cal ski team. Yep. So I skied giant slalom and slalom.
Nice.
So I would say that kind of emphasis on environmental protection was really important. And so some of the components of my career path I certainly see coming from my parents. Mm-hmm. But starting a company was not one of them. Right. That said, they've been extremely supportive. Nice. They're investors in my company. Oh, cool. And so it's really wonderful to see that, even though that was not their career path.
Mm-hmm. So think about when you were a kid, like maybe junior high age, what was your dream job? Like, what did you think you would be doing?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and it definitely changed throughout my my life. I think as an early child, I wanted to be an author. I loved reading and I loved writing. Yep. And then later in life, even in high school, I think I thought I would be a scientist, and that also was the case in college. So you mentioned I have a degree in molecular environmental biology.
What is that?
I still don't know. It's basically biology with a big focus on molecular biology, but then kind of understanding how that fits into the broader context all the way up to the ecological level. Mm-hmm. So I took, organic chemistry, molecular biology, but also toxicology, so kind of a variety of components that could, a lot of people were pre-med majors. I didn't want to go to med school, but I thought I might do public health or be a field biologist. So I didn't know, but I did know that I was interested in environmental problem solving and how humans and the environment interact, and sort of how that intersection occurs and how the environment really impacts people's health. And so that was always an interest of mine, and even now my work with reducing carbon emissions and air pollution, that clearly has a human and environmental health component.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting that oftentimes their dream job, we think of them as silly, like firemen, but sometimes there's like you said, writer, I've had people say, well, I wanted to produce film. I wanted to be a filmmaker. And then as we talk, we find out that they ended up producing some films. Or, it comes back in some way. Like maybe you're in the midst of a startup, so you've got that focus. But maybe later in life, when you have a little bit of time to breathe, some of that might come back. You might end up doing the writing that you thought you would do.
Yeah, maybe I'll write a book.
I would love to read it and have you come back and we'll talk about it. But so you're 22, you've got this great degree from a great school, you're a high achieving athlete. What did you think your life plan was at that point? So I talked about you did take a job where you had some environmental experience, but I'm just curious, again, a lot of these folks are going to graduate. What were you kind of thinking in your senior year at 22?
I was thinking about the recession.
Yeah.
It was 2009. And everybody was worried about getting a job. And a lot of people who graduated with a degree from UC Berkeley were not getting jobs. And so that was a huge concern of, am I going to have a job at all, let alone a job that is interesting and relevant. So I was lucky enough to have had 2 previous summer, they weren't internships, they were paid summer jobs in Berkeley, working for a nonprofit running energy efficiency programs where we employed young adults to do energy and water conservation audits. And so because of that previous work experience during the summer, and I had done well in those roles, I was offered a full-time job immediately starting after graduation. And so while this sector maybe wasn't exactly what I was thinking I would do, this was energy efficiency,
right.
It was nonprofits, I thought I would do more of like a direct science path. This was a good opportunity. And there was clearly some leadership opportunities with it, and I thought it was an interesting field. And so I took it. But at that time, I was really happy to have a job.
Yep. But you didn't sacrifice that bigger dream of getting into making sure that you were in a sustainable, environmentally friendly position.
Certainly.
And I'm so glad you said that. And I did not set this up with Heather, but I'm such an advocate for students finding work experience while they're in school. For a variety of reasons, and the way you stated that was just perfect. And you never know where it's going to lead. And if you don't take that opportunity to make those networks, make those connections, get that experience, get the reference, right?
Yeah.
You probably got that job. You were at the head of the pack even in that horrible recession because other folks didn't have that experience. So
Absolutely.
I'm so glad.
And the executive director of that organization saw my potential early on, continually gave me leadership opportunities.
Nice.
Put me in charge of a program running, I was managing, like you said, at 1.25 staff and multi-million-dollar contracts with the utilities. And I was, 24 years old.
Nice.
So I think having people that see your potential and believe in you and having those people as mentors is really important. And so my supervisor, the executive director at the time, is continually a mentor to me, and we're still in close touch.
Wow, you're hitting all my notes. That's perfect. I love it. So you worked at Rising Sun for I think about 6 years, right?
It depends if you count undergrad as well.
So 5
Actually,
plus.
7 years including undergrad.
Okay, so including the undergrad experience. Why did you leave for the master's? Again, I get that question in office hours all the time. Should I get a master's degree? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no, depending on what the person wants to get out of it.
Right.
But in your case, what was the motivation? And I'd love to feel like, did that motivation get met? So a lot of times you walk into it with expectations, it's still a good experience, but necessarily your expectations weren't right.
Yeah. My motivation was to really increase my knowledge and technical knowledge within the energy and renewable energy and clean technologies field. And I felt that I would get that in my professional career, but it would take longer. And so I wanted to expedite that learning process.
So were you an eco-entrepreneur?
Yes.
So that was your sub-discipline, okay.
Yes. So I got the eco-entrepreneurship focus.
And that's why you guys do a project, and I guess all the students do a project, but is that correct still?
Yeah, so
all the students do a project, but yours is focused on?
Well, you either do a client project or you do an eco-entrepreneurship project. So a client project, it's like a consulting team. You work for, NRDC might be a client, or the Sierra Club, and you work on a project with a group of people and you have a deliverable. That's usually analyzing data that's been collected by other people. Whereas with the eco-entrepreneurship project, you get to come up with a business model and test it and iterate. And so I thought that was a really unique opportunity.
You were
and
smart. You were
so
smart.
I took that.
It was and it is, and look where you are now.
And it also gave me the opportunity to focus on what I wanted to learn. So I could design my project to be around electric vehicles, and there was no client project at the time that was on that subject.
Right. Again, and there's so many downsides of startups. One of the upsides is you get to do what you want to do, right?
Yeah.
You get to say,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to focus on this, and then today I'm going to do this. And then on the downside is you have to do everything. But there's lots of upsides too. So when you were you mentioned that you had that pivotal sort of dinner with your parents, and they're like, what's going to happen, Heather? When do you think, and looking back, it's maybe imperfect, but what's your best recollection as to when you said, hey, this is more than a project. I really think I can make this a business?
I think it was probably midway through my second year in grad school.
Okay.
And so we'd been working
And
on
it's a 2-year program for people that don't know. So you were 3/4 of the way done.
Yeah. And we had been working on the idea for about a year. And I think we just got so much interest. And it wasn't just EV drivers, it was industry experts and investors and consumers. And it felt like there was too much momentum around this idea to let it stop. And I wanted to see what we could do with it.
And did you do the new venture competition? I thought you did.
So we placed third in the new
Okay.
venture competition.
Again, something else I advocate with these folks in this room. It's such a great opportunity to really learn what it's like to launch a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was helpful. We competed actually at UC Berkeley in a clean cup, or it was like the Clean Tech University Cup. We won some prize money there. We won some prize money from NBC. I got a fellowship from UC Santa Barbara. So we had enough money at the graduating to feel like we could build a basic prototype of the
Did
software.
some of your early investors come, or were they initially exposed to you through the NVC?
A few of them, but I'd say more of them actually through an accelerator program that we did after.
Because I know a
Hochrein.
couple, we won't name them. I know a couple of your investors, and I thought maybe
Yeah.
that's where they saw you.
Actually, you're right. One of them did.
Yeah,
I think
I know.
I know who you're talking about.
I know who that is. All right, let's take the first student's question.
Hi, Heather. I'm Daniel. I just wanted to ask, what aspect of EVmatch's two-sided market was more difficult to build up? Getting enough people to become charging hosts, or gaining customers to download the app?
Yeah, so you really hit the challenges of a two-sided marketplace. You have two different customer segments that you have to address, and it's kind of a chicken or egg problem. I would say that we have struggled to get the suppliers, so to get the hosts has been more difficult than attracting drivers. And what we found is as we have more suppliers on the platform, it's easier to attract the drivers, and there's more organic growth among the EV drivers. So we've actually invested more of our marketing and sales resources into attracting suppliers. And I think that is not surprising, but we also have to optimize the location of our suppliers and ensuring that once we do have the hosts on the platform, then we market to drivers in the correct areas. So there's certainly an optimization problem that will continually be something that we're working on as we go.
So the Forbes article that I wrote that was very popular,
That did well.
and it's funny, I had a friend say, I was reading this article, it's really good, and then I saw at the bottom you wrote it. Because if you Google Tesla road trip or something, it's up there,
Yeah.
right? So I didn't go into gory detail in the article because I didn't want to sound like a complete idiot, but my battery almost completely died on the highway. So the way it works with a Tesla is stuff just starts shutting down. And because I was a novice, it was the first road trip I'd ever taken, and that's, like, you don't do that. Like, you don't run your battery to zero. Like, we're so used to cars, the gas, you look at the gas gauge, you're like, oh, I have an eighth of a tank, I'm fine. Oh, I'm almost empty, I'm fine. And you pull in and fill it up. That is not the right way to do a road trip in an electric vehicle. And so I wrote an article about that, and the response was tremendous. I mean, I think there's still a lot of misinformation and lack of education about the proper use and the proper planning of a road trip. You really have to plan it quite differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is. That's a good analogy with the phone battery, because we've all been there watching your phone die, or you're on the phone with somebody and you're like, it's gonna go.
Yeah. But I had the same experience. I have a Bolt, a Chevy Bolt, and I've been driving it to and from the Bay Area, which is a long trip in an electric car, because you have to stop a couple times. And so on my last trip, coming home, I was really cutting it close. And I think I got here to campus, and I live downtown, and it started flashing and stuff started
it's
shutting
like, not
down.
kidding.
And I was thinking, well, if it really died right now, it wouldn't be the worst thing.
Right.
But it would be very embarrassing.
Right. Well, my wife is here, and she can testify that I actually missed the exit for the charging station as the car was dying. I'm like, no! So I had to turn around, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have to call AAA and say, can you tow my electric vehicle? But we made it, but barely. It is very angst-ridden. So let's talk about what EVmatch is. We talked about kind of how your path came. You came to this opportunity. Explain what is meant when I say a peer-to-peer national charging network. What does that really mean?
Yeah. So what we offer is a software platform, both web and mobile applications, that allow people to rent out their private charging stations. So that could look like a home charging station that they've installed for personal use, or a business charging station. And so we have a platform that connects both those suppliers and EV drivers who need more charging, and we provide reservations, payment processing, access control features, and now some unique user group management features that's designed for like multifamily properties in particular.
Okay.
And so really what we're doing is bringing privately owned charging infrastructure into public use to make it easier for people to make the shift to electric. And so we really specifically designed the service to help renters and multi-unit dwellers and folks who don't have home charging even consider buying or leasing an electric car.
We'll talk about the pivot. It's not really a pivot, but we'll talk about the change in your emphasis in your business in a minute. But I'd be curious to understand how your approach differs from other folks, because there are a lot of, it's a big problem, it's an obvious problem, a lot of people are trying to solve it. How does your approach differ from some of the others that are out there?
Yeah. So there's a few obviously well-known providers, like Tesla has the Tesla Supercharger network, or some other providers like EVgo or ChargePoint provide fast charging services. I'd say in general those—
But that's a proprietary network,
yeah,
right?
So there's a couple differences, but one, that's a kind of top-down, very infrastructure heavy approach where you build the charging stations, you operate them, and you spend a lot of time kind of doing real estate development, so site selection and development. And a lot of those networks, like you said, are proprietary. Tesla is only available to Tesla vehicles. ChargePoint has proprietary hardware that only works with their software, so it's kind of the Apple approach. And so a couple differences about our service. One, we are leveraging existing infrastructure or underutilized infrastructure and bringing it together in a network, taking more of a kind of a Google approach where we're integrating with different hardware manufacturers as opposed to manufacturing our own hardware.
Right.
And then really kind of opening up all of these previously undiscovered charging locations. And so that's the peer-to-peer component, where we're bringing in these private chargers that were not publicly available, and we provide this seamless payment processing platform that allows people to easily monetize their private assets.
Right, and have, and with the safety factor and all the other things.
Yeah, so that's pretty different, the idea of peer-to-peer charging.
Right.
And we're really the first in the US. That there's a few other companies throughout the world, maybe there's one in Europe, one in Australia, one in Canada, but really we were the first to launch commercially with that model. But then the other component when you think about competitors is that there's the fast charging services like Tesla,
right.
But then there's what we offer is level 2 charging. So that's it's not as fast as a supercharger, but it's faster than a regular outlet. So it still takes several hours to charge an electric vehicle.
Right.
And so where our solution fits really well is at hotels, at homes, at businesses, at workplaces. So somewhere where you're spending multiple hours. And what we offer is a reservation system. So you can book in advance and know exactly where you're going to charge. And that is unique. And that's we're the only service provider with reservations.
That's fantastic. That was one of the strategies we took after we did our second road trip was, okay, we have to stay at places that have a Tesla charging station, but you don't know if they're going to be full.
Right.
So you pull in at 9 o'clock at night and you're like, wonderful, all 4 of them are taken. What are you going to do? No, but being able to reserve it takes away that anxiety, because it's not just, am I going to run out? It's like, can I get in? Is there going to be a slot for me? It's not like a gas station where you just wait in line and then fill up.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you could think, again, these are hard, it's hard to be exact about this, but if you think back to your first years are tough. Is there one thing that you wish you would have known on day one that you didn't figure out until later? What is something you were like, that would have been nice to know?
Yeah, There's so many things.
Well, give me more than one.
I think one thing is understanding that it's okay to make mistakes, and maybe not agonizing over every decision as much as I did at the beginning.
Is that something that is sort of in your personality, or did you feel that way because it was a startup and you just didn't want to, you took money and you didn't want to lose people's money?
Yeah, a little bit of that, or feeling like there's so much at stake here.
Right.
There's a lot of risk that you feel like you don't want to do anything wrong, and that could kill your business, right? And so I think having a little bit of faith in your intuition and then also just becoming a better decision maker over time is a learned skill. But I think having that willingness to just make a decision and know that it might be the wrong decision.
You'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Right.
That would be one thing I would tell myself.
I think that bias to actions is really good advice because, and again, in the startup world, you're not going to be right. You're probably going to be wrong most of the time. But if you're course correcting quickly what you realize you're wrong and find what's right, then you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
If you agonize and agonize and agonize, the rest of the market is just going to leave you behind.
Yeah. And it takes too long. You can't spend that much time.
No.
Analyzing everything, reading all the research.
Right.
Sometimes you just have to try something.
The first time I heard your idea, it's like I didn't know your idea. I just heard probably that first investor or one of your early investors, right? What the analogy I came up with, or sort of the match I did, was I said that reminds me of in San Francisco, people would rent out their driveways when they were at work because parking is such a premium in San Francisco. Do you feel like that's sort of a fair, rough analogy of the peer-to-peer side of what you're doing?
Yes, I would say it's a fair analogy for the residential peer-to-peer with some added components around kind of the complexity of calculating electricity prices and displaying that information accurately. But yeah, absolutely.
Because it kind of felt like it was either there's a spot, there isn't a spot, what are they going to charge? I need the spot today, so you can't park there. It's very logistic heavy.
Yeah, I think that what's nice about the moment we're in right now is there's a lot of companies to look at and learn from. And so we are constantly looking at, well, how did Airbnb do this? Or how does Uber do it? Or how did Zipcar do it? And we're even thinking about that right now with building in, for example, penalties if people overstay their reservation. And those penalties, influence user behavior.
Big time.
So especially if they're significant penalties. And Zipcar really figured that out.
And Tesla too.
And Tesla, their idle fees, they start after 5 minutes, right?
If your car is charged and you're not moving,
So it's really nice to be able to look at some of those other business models and see what they've learned, what they've implemented. I think that it's nice given that I think about a decade ago or 2 decades ago, you didn't have those kind of companies to look at. And so entrepreneurs were really figuring all those things out.
Two-sided markets are tough, right? Because if you have too much demand on one side and not enough supply on the other, people are going to stop using it. I mean, Uber they had many reasons why they succeeded, but one of them was they were very regional. Like they rolled it out very regionally and really concentrated on Austin, concentrated on Santa Barbara or whatever. I think you almost have to do that when you have a dual system. And I know you're doing some work in Colorado, which we'll talk about in a second.
But we're primarily in California and then the Denver, Boulder area.
Well, that fits into my next question. So I think everyone needs more education about, including me, obviously. Everyone needs more education about working with an EV. But what do you think what are some of the myths that you see around charging or around owning an EV?
Yeah, I love that you asked this. We do the weekly blog posts.
You have a great blog.
And one of them today is 3 myths about EVs.
Oh, okay. So, I should just read the blog.
Yeah. No, it hasn't come out yet. I need to read it after this interview. So a couple myths. One is that I think people don't always understand how long it takes to charge. But also that gets exaggerated and people will say, well, there's literally nowhere to charge. So I think, there's a learning curve with driving an electric car, but there's also maybe not understanding of the difference between fast charging, level 1, 2, and 3 charging. So for example, level 1 charging is using a standard outlet. Right. And a lot of people don't know you can actually charge an electric car with a regular 110 volt outlet. And a lot of people do that at home. And so I remember I used to charge at home and my neighbors would walk by and would ask me about it. Like, oh, I had no idea you could plug your car into the side of your wall. Right. So that's one. I would say other people think that EVs don't work in the cold. So we get a lot of myths about it.
And there were early issues.
And there are battery performance components,
Right.
but there's just a lot of kind of misinformation that's out there that says flat out EVs just don't work in the cold. But you look at the uptick of
I wonder who would be putting that misinformation out.
I wonder. Maybe the Koch brothers. But you look at the uptick of EVs in Norway, for example, and it's obvious that EVs do work in the cold.
Right.
And so as we've expanded beyond California, which we're primarily in Southern California and the Bay Area, pretty moderate climates, we've had to tackle that myth quite a bit.
Well, let's talk about Boulder, because I was going to save it for later, but what have you learned there, and what have you learned that you can take into other colder markets?
Yeah. Well, that a lot of education is required around, how do you operate an EV when it's cold? What are the ideal conditions? I think a lot of people want to know what percentage battery or range reduction will they get. And
What is it?
I would say it can be as high as 20 to 30%, but most of it is using the cabin heat. So it's
Right.
kind of like,
Makes
how
sense.
willing are you to be cold?
Right. And that's why the Tesla was shutting down on me. They were like, you don't need the radio, you don't need
Yeah. So when I drive from here to San Francisco, I don't use any AC or heat. And so in the summer, that's not super comfortable, but it actually saves me like an extra hour.
Oh, okay.
So I don't have to stop and charge.
Does it take longer to charge when it's colder?
It can, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly at high speeds, so fast charging.
Okay. So I think one thing that it was super obvious, but I had to figure it out, was you don't have to fill it up. It's not like a car where you fill up the gas. Because we're just so prone to like, well, I'm here, filling it up, right? Whereas with an EV, like say you're going to LA, it's 90 miles, 180 miles round trip. If you have 200 miles or 220, you're probably okay.
Yeah.
You don't need 375
Yeah.
or you don't need that extra. And a lot of people don't realize and I'm no expert in battery design or physics, but that last 10, 20% takes a lot longer than the other 70 or 80%, just because of the way the batteries distribute the electricity.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a road trip, you kind of want to optimize where you're just charging up to 80%, and then you're going along your way and then charging again. Because like you said, that last bit takes much longer.
Right, but our mindset is fill it up.
Right.
We just have that fill up mindset. So I think that'll change. But
Yeah.
well, that fits with another question. Just as idle curiosity, but somebody that thinks about this all day long, like this is your world. And I know this isn't your specialty, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what do you think is going to happen to all the petroleum-based gas stations?
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for repurposing that space. And that could I think some of it might turn into city parks, for example. A lot of these gas stations are in open spaces. They could be repurposed. You also could imagine that they would be other retail locations, or that they will be fast charging stations that then have more amenities, because people spend more time when they're charging their vehicle.
Right.
Maybe
You
an
wanna
hour.
eat,
You'll have restaurants, coffee shops. You'll have internet. They might be more of kind of a hub that has Wi-Fi, and you bring your laptop and you do work and you charge. So I could see that. But I do think there will be we won't need as many gas stations, because people are going to be charging at home, and you're going to be charging at work. And so this idea of having these kind of dedicated places that are only for fueling your vehicles, we won't have to have as much of that infrastructure. So I think there's an opportunity to repurpose that land for other activities.
So I bring that up because I was curious, and also there's a cycle in entrepreneurship that's gone on since the dawn of time, which is a new innovation comes in, solves solves some problems, but it always creates new problems or creates new opportunities. So an entrepreneur, you might be sitting in the audience saying, well, I don't know anything. I didn't go to Berkeley, and I don't know molecular human engineering, and how can I play in this field? Well, just think of things like that. Like, what are going to happen to all the gas stations? Like, maybe you could be the person that starts to repurpose these things in a very innovative and appealing way. Or the same with retail. Like, we could bemoan the fact that Amazon's destroyed retail, or we could say, well, how do we leverage that? These buildings, these malls, they're in opportune places typically. They're places that large population centers can get to relatively easily. What else can we do with them? So we know in Santa Barbara, Amazon's moving into an old Macy's. It's an old Macy's that just couldn't cut it because of the online business, and now we have a great high-tech company here in town. So anyway, it's for folks like you to figure it out. We'll take the next student's question.
Hi, Heather. Thank you for being here. A commonly held capitalist belief is that the free market will be able to produce novel solutions to the impending disasters predicted by climate change. As the CEO of an innovative company interested in environmental protection, do you agree with this sentiment?
I like that question. I'd like to say, do you mind, what do you think?
Personally, I think that we can't trust the free market to
I suspected that.
Yeah, but I'm open to, I don't know much, so I'd really like to hear from people that do.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I was just curious.
Yeah, I agree with you that I don't think the free market will solve all of our environmental problems. And even though I run a private company, and I think that we have a very innovative solution, I certainly don't think that the corporate sector is the end-all be-all solution. Yeah. With that said, I think that business and corporations have really been stepping up as it comes to climate change mitigation, particularly in the absence of strong federal policy. So in the absence of a carbon tax or a cap and trade system at the national level, you see huge corporations that are making really aggressive commitments to renewable energy procurement, to electrification, interesting water recycling techniques, a variety of different components that improve their sustainability. So I think that there's a place for corporate innovation and the private sector to come up with novel solutions, but I also think that that has to be in tandem with really thoughtful state and federal policy about, in this case, carbon emissions, but really environmental policy in general, and really developing systems to account for these externalities that currently, there's a lot of pollution, there's a lot of activities that the corporate sector is contributing to society and not necessarily paying for.
Yeah, I know you didn't ask me, but I'll throw my 2 cents. I don't believe in conspiracies and cabals and that there's this powerful forces, but I do believe in people that have vested interest, right? And I do believe that there's huge corporations that stand a lot to lose. Mm-hmm. So I think in the short term, it's not really a free market. When you have those powerful, very wealthy entities that don't want to lose the existing business, right? So, and every entrepreneur faces this, but it's various levels, right? The incumbents never want to give up their business. Right. They don't walk up to you and say, "Hey, here you go. Here's 10% of my business." You have to earn it, right? You have to earn it from the consumers. But I think in the short term, there is some room for just to make sure they play fair. Speaking of which, what do you think about the states that have not allowed Tesla dealerships to open? I mean, when I read about that, I was shocked. There's actually states that have made laws that say you can't open a Tesla dealership in my state. And I won't name the state, but there's one state that if you buy a Tesla, so let's say it's shipped from California, when it enters that state, they have to cover the truck so that it doesn't, as it goes across the highway, people don't know that somebody bought a Tesla. I mean, that's extreme.
And when we talk about a free market too, we don't live in a free market. You look at the subsidies that we have for oil and gas. This is not an even playing field that we're currently operating in. So I think that when it comes to state policy, there's a huge variety in the policies in place and how states are viewing transportation electrification. Some states are more, there's more opposition, and some are embracing it, like California, which has a goal to have 5 million EVs on the road by 2030.
How many are there now?
About 900,000. So we got a ways to go, but it's
10 years.
It's feasible.
Yeah.
And California is known for setting really aggressive goals and then achieving those, and that often kind of sets the tone for other states or allows other states to see what's possible. Mm-hmm. And so I always appreciate that. But I think to your point about some states having these rules, I mean, there's a huge lobby from the automotive industry, and they've always had a dealer model, and they want to hold on to that sales model. And they're seeing a threat with Tesla's direct sales model, which is very effective,
right.
And actually is critical, I think, for selling electric cars because there is a big customer education component to an electric vehicle. Mm-hmm. And historically, dealers are not well trained on how to sell an electric car, how to answer these questions about charging and onboard charger rates, and there's some complexity to it. And so Tesla's done exceptionally well at training their salespeople. They actually work for Tesla,
right.
And they are motivated by the manufacturer to sell the vehicle. So I think it's unfortunate that that's been a barrier, but it is changing. And people luckily want these cars.
Right,
And
right.
because they're such staunch advocates for the cars themselves, the consumers want to have the laws change.
Right, it'll change. I look at it like Uber, when they tried to get into the East Coast cities with the cab companies, they won because
Yeah.
people want. It wasn't because, it wasn't anything other than people said, that's ridiculous, I want to take an Uber.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you
If
know,
there's consumer demand,
I don't want a stinky cab.
The
and,
rules
you know,
will change.
So they got in. Well, what also is ironic about these states is they're the most free market states in our country.
Right, right.
It's like, well, if you're really a free market state, then why are you keeping Tesla out?
Yeah.
Like, why don't you just let them open up their...
You're talking about Texas.
I don't want to name any
I was
states.
going to say, you're talking about Texas.
I love it. I love that state, and I do. And my personal experience with Tesla, I had a couple of former students at the dealership, and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
It was a different experience.
It's a different experience.
So when people get a flavor for that, I didn't like they wouldn't let me haggle, but most people like.
But you can buy online.
Most people like that they don't haggle.
Yeah.
That was just me.
So I do a lot of EV car shopping personally because I did get a new car recently, but also for the experience, and I'll go drive different cars and ask the sales reps questions about charging, and it's very interesting to see the difference between a Tesla representative
Right.
and other dealers.
So if you're comfortable, do you mind saying what? Because I think people would be curious. Somebody who's an expert in this industry, like what car did you end up going with?
Yeah, so I have a Chevy Bolt, and previously I had a Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid. Had 53 miles of electric range, and then it also has a gas engine.
Right.
But I wanted to make the jump to all electric, so that was a lease, a 3-year lease. And so when that was up this summer, I chose the Bolt. I test drove a Model 3, but it was a little out of my price
Still
range at the
expensive.
moment.
Yeah.
I also drove the Hyundai Kona, the Nissan Leaf, a couple of the Kia Niro. So I really wanted like a long-range battery electric vehicle.
Right.
And the Bolt has been great.
Yeah. I think when Tesla finally gets that price point down, then the
Yeah.
floodgates are going to open.
Hi, Heather. I wanted to know, as someone without a formal business education background, how were you able to set your plan into motion and build a team with the knowledge to make your vision for this company a reality? What has been your hardest obstacle to date with the company?
Yeah, so I don't have a formal business degree, as you said, and that has been a challenge to some extent. I think I'm often learning things as I go because I haven't had formal training. Though I will say that my master's degree, it wasn't an MBA, it was a master's in environmental science and management. I did choose classes that had kind of a business focus. So for example, I took new venture finance. I took a lot of economics classes. I took a marketing class, but it was all around sustainability. So how do you sell sustainable products, for example? So I did get some of that formal training in graduate school, which was helpful, particularly the finance components. And then a lot of it I learned in my previous work experience. So working for 5 years in management roles at a nonprofit, even though it wasn't a for-profit company, I learned about contract negotiation. I learned how to manage a budget and manage staff. And a lot of those skills translate into for-profit business. And also working for a small nonprofit in many ways is like working for a startup because we were a small entity, we were growing, we were fundraising, we had to be scrappy. So I think a lot of those skills actually translated quite well. And your second question was around what's been most difficult? And we haven't talked about this yet, but fundraising has been very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And raising capital, I think, is difficult for any entrepreneur. It's particularly difficult for female founders and first-time entrepreneurs. So that has been something that's more difficult than I ever anticipated. And I know it will continually be a challenge, but it's something that I am getting better at, and I'm certainly learning how to navigate that process along the way.
Going back to what has been challenging from a business standpoint, what classes would you have wanted to take? Like more accounting, or where do you think you really had to learn on the job the most? You mentioned finance.
I would have taken another finance class, or I took one class through TMP, New Venture Finance, and that was really, or maybe it was called Finance for Entrepreneurs, but it was basically how do you do the accounting and
Yep.
the fundraising when you're running a tiny company, which
Right.
is quite different than if you were doing finance for a large
Oh, for sure.
corporation.
Yep.
And that has proven to be very useful. I think I even reference back to that book
Yeah, good.
from time to time. I would take another finance class. I would have also taken a sales and marketing class. In fact,
I teach sales and marketing.
yeah, I find myself trying to learn online a lot about sales and
Yeah.
marketing.
I mean, it's fundamental, like persuasion and influence, what motivates people. Yeah, it's a rich area of research and fun to read about.
Yeah.
And for you, it's right down your alley right now.
Yes.
Because it's fundraising.
Yeah.
When you're fundraising, you're selling the future, you're selling your ability to deliver on the future. Yeah, lots of sales.
Absolutely.
Good stuff.
I didn't realize that. That fundraising was sales.
Yeah, it's all sales. But you have to deliver on it too, or you'll never raise any more money. So we mentioned earlier that you pivoted, and what I mean by that is EVmatch initially was strictly a peer-to-peer network, or at least you thought that was going to be your vision. And like every business ever, including Uber, which started out as a black car service, you pivoted and just kind of morphed as the market talked to you and told you what they wanted. So talk a little bit about how that came about and then how that's manifested itself. Like what is your focus now?
Yeah. So like you said, originally it was purely residential peer-to-peer. And we still are operating that service, and it's still growing, but we found that I think to one of the previous questions, that is a tough business model because you have to have hundreds of thousands of customers to reach profitability. And so even just at looking at the numbers and our projections and in the fundraising process, realize that if we could bring in another revenue stream, a software as a service model, we would be that much closer to reaching profitability within
and you need
3
to
years.
raise less money.
We'd raise less money.
Yep.
And also we saw that there was an opportunity to bring this model, a lower cost charging solution to businesses and multifamily properties.
Well, maybe talk about the pivot a little bit, because I
Yeah.
didn't make it clear. So what did you decide to do?
So we decided to expand the software platform to enable not only homeowners to list on the platform, but also businesses and apartment complexes, which we deem as commercial customers. And so in order to do that, we really needed to integrate with hardware. So we had to have a full solution. And so what we did is we integrated with a hardware manufacturer. At the time, they were a startup in the Bay Area. Since then, they've been acquired by an Italian utility company called NLX. And so they make pretty low-cost, Wi-Fi enabled level 2 charging stations. So this is 240 volt, typically 40 amp hardware. About $600 to $1,000 for the unit itself. And so that fit with our customer profile because we wanted hardware that was relatively affordable but had some networking capabilities so we can collect data and we can offer access control features. So if we want to have reservations at commercial sites, we had to be able to turn on and off the chargers. Whereas at a home, it's okay to have it be kind of self-managed or managed by the site host. You assume that you're not going to have those access control issues in someone's private driveway. But when you have a charger in a public location, you absolutely have to be able to turn it on and off. So a couple things. We noticed there was an opportunity. We were getting requests for hosting outside of residential locations. And we also had the resources, the engineering resources and the capacity to do that hardware integration. And so I would say that was one of the limitations at the beginning. We just wanted to get something out there and build traction. And so once we finally had the ability to do that next set of engineering requirements, then we did. And so we did that this year. And since then, we've expanded to commercial properties, and then in particular, now we're really focused on multifamily residential properties, which are commercial entities. They're typically property management companies who own and operate the buildings, but they are residential sites.
And the value prop for them is obvious, right? If you're a retail establishment, you're going to draw people into your retail shopping center or whatever it is, mall. And if you're a property manager, it's another sales point to people that wanted to buy an electronic vehicle, but were always like, well, how am I going to charge it?
Exactly.
Like, now. And I noticed here just locally with some of the new construction, they have a nice cadre of electronic charging stations for their either renters or homeowners.
Yeah.
Makes total sense. And you told me about a term I'd never heard before, icing.
Oh yeah,
And
you hadn't heard that?
Well, I'm clueless.
I figured as a Tesla driver you would know that.
No, I haven't heard it. Maybe explain what it is and then what do you guys do to try to combat?
I mean, it's a super technical term. Some people don't even like EV drivers using it because they seem pretentious, but it's internal combustion engine, ING. So icing is like when an ICE vehicle, a regular gas car, parks in an EV spot and blocks it. And so it's kind of jargon that EV drivers use. But what happened like this last year is people, particularly in Denver, Colorado area, big trucks were parking in Tesla spots and blocking them. And did this, I think they did it around Christmas time, or it was holiday travel, and it was very disruptive, and it garnered a lot of media attention. And then, of course, Tesla drivers were furious, and they showed that you can tow like a F-250 with a Model X. And so they towed the vehicles out of place. Of course, the owners were not there.
Right.
But yeah, icing has become a problem. It's sort of a aggressive behavior that people are just blocking these spots to try and make it more difficult to own an electric car.
So, I mean, if you're doing it on purpose, that's ridiculous. That's like parking in a handicap zone to protest handicapped people. It makes no sense.
So in response to that, and this particular issue was really prevalent in Denver, the state of Colorado passed a law that now allows citations and fines if a gas car or truck is parked in a EV-only parking spot. Because previously you couldn't cite them for that, and you couldn't give them a ticket. And so if you don't have any penalty, even though it says EV only.
I'm sure some people did it innocently, but if people are doing it on purpose, that's
there was like a whole campaign where people were doing it quite maliciously.
That's kind of weird. So now I know. So when I want to be pretentious, I just say, "Oh, you're driving an ICE?
Yeah.
Oh, bye." I will never do that ever.
Yeah. People will get in fights with you on Twitter if you do that.
Oh, I promise I won't do that. So something you said a couple of things there that are very common with startups is partnering. Startups seldom have the whole solution.
Yeah.
You just can't, right?
Yeah.
You can't build everything. So startups in general have to be very partner friendly. And some companies can pull that off, and it's just not in their DNA for others. Did you feel like that was did that come I mean, you obviously pulled off some great partnerships. Did that kind of come naturally to you and to the company?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the ethos of the company, and we're all about collaboration and peer-to-peer is getting individuals as your partners.
Right.
But further to that, we recognized we didn't want to be a hardware company. I certainly don't have that expertise. I didn't feel like the team we were building
the capital involved.
Or the capital, given fundraising is already hard enough. We didn't want to build hardware.
Right.
So, and why should we? There's a lot of opportunity to simply partner with other companies.
Right.
So I think, like I said, that's been a really strategic partnership for us with NLX. It's helped us launch into kind of another customer vertical. And what was helpful is we got in with them when they were small, and then they've grown. And so that's always nice if you can kind of see opportunity with other startups and then support one another. And it
gives you validation. When you go out and fundraise, you say, look at our partner list, and they can reference you. It just shows, it makes you look bigger than maybe you really are.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're still working on that and continuing to develop hardware partnerships. And then the other component I wanted to mention was around utility partnerships. So that, I think, really for me has been a focus, and that was coming from my previous work at Rising Sun Energy Center. So we manage contracts from Pacific Gas and Electric Company and all the municipal utilities in the Bay Area. So I had some familiarity with how utilities contract and what that process looks like. What is that procurement process? And so from day one, you can see all the reasons why utilities are interested in this space, and they're motivated to get more electric cars on the road. So that's been a big objective of mine, is finding partnerships with utilities, and that process takes a long time.
Yes.
So luckily we've started years ago, and now we're running 3 different utility pilots. And so I think that will just be the beginning of bigger opportunities there.
It's a competitive advantage that you have, that that world. I mean, I often advise startups, don't deal with the government in the early stages, because they're just going to eat up your time and it takes forever. But once you're in, it's a great barrier, because they take forever. And so it's going to take your competitors forever to catch up with you. So good for you that you started that process early.
And you
know how to do it.
And if you could get more customer revenue, you don't have to raise as much capital from investors.
Totally.
Also, I'm familiar working with municipalities. So early on, we got a grant with the city of Boulder. And so things like that where, maybe some other entrepreneurs wouldn't go after municipal or utility money.
Right.
But I felt like I had the expertise to do that.
Yeah, good for you. That's hard to do. I want to ask you just a little bit, we're going to take one more student question after this, about we mentioned your blog. It's very good content if you're interested at all in this space. It's not just sort of self-promotional stuff. Do you do that in-house, or how have you managed your blog? Any tips for other folks that are thinking about creating content?
Yeah, so we do write all of our own content. Occasionally we have guest bloggers who are our investors that I rope into writing blogs for us. I was going to say your friend, maybe he'll be writing one.
Yeah, maybe he'll write one.
But so we have guest contributors who are our friends and our advisors. But typically our sales and marketing lead, he writes all of our content with ideas from me and the rest of the team and support in kind of finding interesting news to report on, collecting data from our users. Sometimes it's survey data that we report on. Sometimes it's product reviews.
It's a great way to do it because you're becoming an expert in this field, and eventually media will start, recognizing, if I have a question about where this industry is going, I'm going to call Heather.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about how do you analyze the value of the blog recently. And so we looked at all of our recent blog posts and what lists they did well with, because we email it to all of our customer lists. And we see, does it resonate with our customers or our partners? And what we found is for our customers, really, product-related blogs, like product reviews, were extremely well received, and kind of industry knowledge. So they really our customers and our audience are excited about our level of understanding within this sector. So we did, for example, a highlight on the top EV charging stations on our platform. We have thousands of people on this platform. What's the number one charging station listed? Is it Tesla? Is it ChargePoint? So we did a breakdown of the numbers, and we did some graphics, and then we did a write-up of why people chose certain hardware. And we've done the same for solar. We've done the same for home battery storage systems. And so I think people are now seeing EVmatch as a source of kind of clean energy information.
I mean, I'm sure this is on your roadmap, you can start feeding that to journalists and then have them write, you write part of the article and then they wrap around that.
Yeah. And it is part of our sales and marketing strategy, because we've had a few of those blogs get picked up by Clean Technica, which is a well-regarded publication for this audience. And when that happens, our web traffic just spikes.
That's great.
And that's basically free advertising.
Yeah.
So we continue to work on this content, one, for SEO purposes, two, for garnering kind of media attention, and then three, for having more engaged customers. So keeping our customers informed, reminding them that we're here, reminding them that we're growing, and that they can continually use our service.
Yep.
So for a business like ours, where we want sticky revenue, we want recurring transactions, it's good to always be reminding your customers that, hey, we're here.
Keep them engaged. And fourth, even though they won't admit it, investors are influenced by things like that. Like they Google and go, wow, look at all these articles. Okay, last student's question.
Hi, Heather. Thank you for being here. What has been the most valuable lesson you've learned from your career as a woman CEO? And what advice would you give to other women who are also aspiring entrepreneurs?
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that one thing I've really learned is the importance of thinking big and bold and being audacious and not letting maybe expectations or other people's perceptions of you hold you back. And so I think that's something that I've grown into and I've leaned into over time, but recognizing your potential and recognizing that you can have a huge impact and really believing in yourself. And I think sometimes women and female leaders will potentially hold themselves back by not thinking big enough and not really having that vision and the idea that you could do it and actually build it. And so I feel like I'm always a little pushed by my mentors and my friends and family to even think bigger than we are currently. And that's something that I think is good advice for any woman who is starting their own company or wanting a leadership role in business.
Great. My last question, it's not a work-life balance question, because I know there's no such thing as work-life balance at a startup. I get that. But the highs are high and the lows are lower. It's just the reality of a startup. That's why we love them. That's why we hate them. How do you stay sane? Like, how do you stay passionate? Don't burn out? How are you handling that? Because that is not easy, and it's not talked about enough.
Yeah, and it's a real issue. I'm glad you mentioned the highs are high and the lows are lows, and that is very true, that it's very exciting and can be almost addicting, the work, but then the lows can be just really discouraging, and it's hard to stay motivated. So I think having components of your life where you can try and let go and acknowledge that there's other parts of you that existed before the business and will continue to exist after the business, and people who remind you of that, I think that's important, because it's easy for me to think of myself as EVmatch and vice versa, and I need to acknowledge that, no, I'm a different person, and I find being with my friends and my family is helpful. Spending time outside. I mean, luckily we live in Santa Barbara, so I spend a lot of time at More Mesa, particularly.
I love More Mesa.
Yeah, on a stressful day, I'll go out there, go for a walk, go for a run. That helps a lot, even just 30 minutes. And the other thing for me is having, so obviously a supportive partner and family, but having the motivation to have an impact. So, this is hard work, but I'm really motivated by the impact and the benefits that our service will have on the environment and mitigating climate change. And I truly see this as the biggest issue of our generation. And so for me to feel like I get to contribute to that is really a privilege. And that keeps me motivated to keep doing the work.
Well, I love you ended on that note, but I'm also glad that you mentioned the importance of friends and family, because it's some people from television or movies or books they've read, they think it's an all or nothing game. Like, to win in business, I've got to be all in and sacrifice. You don't have to sacrifice your personal life, and true success is being successful personally and professionally, and I'm glad you've not lost sight of that, and I really want everyone to hear that message, that don't lose sight of that. Even if you end up financially successful, you're going to look back and go, wow, why did I do that?
Yeah,
there's a lot more to life. Thank you so much, Heather.
Yeah,
really
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.